computer. Okay, so the way this is going to work is I have slides, and so we're going to go through those slides first, and then afterwards we can have discussion if you would like to ask any questions or, you know, personalize it a little bit. So I'm going to go into screen share. Oh, I shared the wrong thing. I'll get it right. Okay. Okay, so we're talking about what's the best diet for you, or how to tell if the diet that you're eating is the right one for you today. Hold on. That's, oh, there we go. Okay. So the first thing I want to discuss, actually, maybe a little bit surprising, is that dietary dogma is destructive. So dietary dogma is basically, you know, you go online and you hear that, you know, you can go onto a vegan website or read a vegan book, and then, you know, the vegan diet is the best diet, or you go onto the paleo and it's the paleo's the best, or keto people are saying, they're literally saying that, like, that's the only way, that's the best way to eat. And people who eat carbs, you know, they're gonna get Alzheimer's and all this stuff. So out there in the world, most of the advice that we get about diet is very dogmatic. And that can be destructive. So an example of this that I have is a client that came to work with me many years ago, actually, but it just was such a vivid example of this that I use it sometimes. She was in her mid-70s, wanted to lose weight. She was quite overweight. Like, I think she was like 275 pounds, but like 5'1". And she had a lot of stress in her life, but somebody had told her she should do the ketogenic diet, a doctor actually. So she was doing the ketogenic diet, and because she had blood sugar, her blood sugar was high, she had a little bit of insulin resistance, and they thought, okay, cut out the carbs and you'll be able to lose weight. And so she had been doing it for about a month when she came to me, but the problem was that she was totally miserable. She was doing it correctly because I tested in her blood. She had ketones, and that's, you know, a little finger prick test that we can do, and I can see if the person is actually in ketosis. And she was producing ketones, but her blood sugar was still high. And the other problem was that she was not losing weight at all. So she was miserable, she wasn't losing weight, she was doing the diet correctly, and her blood sugar was still high. So these are all problems. And so we talked for a bit, and she told me the reason why she hated it was that she felt like she was eating too much food. She always felt full and heavy, and she just wanted to eat more vegetables. And I was like, okay. So over the course of several weeks, we transitioned her diet to more and more and more vegetables, not counting carbs. She didn't start eating white bread or even like rice or anything like that. She just really dramatically increased her vegetable intake. So she was even eating like sweet potatoes and beets and stuff like that. And she was feeling better. She was enjoying the way that she was eating so much more. And she actually started losing weight. So the reason why I bring up this story is because that's a perfect example of how dietary dogma can be destructive, where it's like, oh, well, the doctor told me to do this and I'm just going to follow it. And these are the rules and regulations of the ketogenic diet. Even though I hate it, I'm going to keep doing it, and nothing's changing. And it may sound like unbelievable, but I've met enough people in my line of work that have come to me doing something that was totally terrible, but they were doing it because of dogma, because they thought that was the right thing to do. Another experience that I've had multiple times is people eating a vegan diet and getting a lot of GI issues, a lot of gas and bloating and stuff like that, and just continuing on because that's, you know, the right thing to do. So, so my first point in all of this is that we want to step away from dietary dogma as much as we possibly can and individualize it. So there is no one diet that's right for everybody. It just absolutely does not exist. And anybody who tells you that it does is probably just trying to make money, most likely, or they're trying to make it easy for people, or they're just ignorant. So the example that I have for this is weight loss. So this was a clinical trial that compared the Atkins diet, which is a high-fat, low-carb diet, Weight Watchers, Slim Fast, and Rosemary Conley. This was done in the UK, so that's like a program they have there. Those other three are more along the lines of caloric restriction. And what they found was that over the 6-month period, basically the results were the same. You know, in terms of weight loss, waist size reduction. All diets were found to be safe. And the other thing that's interesting is that the programs with the support were followed more after a 6-month period than ones that didn't have support. So that was an interesting thing too, that we know that support helps. But generally, in terms of the diet, they all work. And this was another study that was looking at low fat versus low carb diets, and basically finding almost identical results after a year. And so basically their conclusion was the practice basically supports the practice of recommending any diet that a patient will adhere to. And this is not just for weight loss, this is for anything. You know, I can design the most perfect, beautiful diet in the world, but if the person's not going to follow it, then like it's useless. So that's really important to keep in mind is number one, you know, people will say that their diet is the best, but it probably is not. It's probably just as good as another diet. It just depends on the person. And the other piece of this is that throughout the years, you know, there have been foods that have been good and then bad, right? Or there are entire food groups that are demonized, like carbohydrates are demonized, right? These days it's like, oh, you know, can't eat carbs, you can't eat carbs, you know, low sugar, low sugar. And that's just simply not true. It's just too simplistic of an approach. But I wanted to use the example of eggs. So this was a study more recent, like in the late 2000, like probably within the past 10 years. I can't remember the exact year, but this was a study that they found. So if you know the history of eggs, that like up from basically the beginning of time until like the 1950s and 60s, eggs were like one of the best foods in the world, like that you could eat, right? Just an easy source of fuel, really good for you. Then they found out that there was cholesterol in it and that cholesterol causes heart disease, supposedly. So then eggs were bad for a long time. Like definitely when I was growing up, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, eggs were considered bad for you. And then all of a sudden there was all this research, and I didn't include it here, but like basically in 2015, the USDA said, there is absolutely no evidence to say that eggs cause heart disease. So it's, you know, but it was even like in the 90s and the low 2000s, people were coming to realize that eggs were actually fine for you to eat. Then this study came out, which said that basically, you know, if you eat more cholesterol, which, you know, eggs have cholesterol, that you have this 18% increased risk for all-cause mortality, and it'll increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. So this study came out, and then people were like, well, what do we do now? We said it was good, it was bad, it was good, it was bad. But, and this is a very interesting point, there was like a review of that study that I just talked about. And they were saying that basically this study was self-reported. First of all, it was observational. So there's different types of studies, and observational studies where they just look at what people are doing. They don't intervene in any way. And really an observational study only has one purpose, and that is to direct future studies. An observational study really is not evidence to say, oh, well, I personally should make a change. It just isn't. Although they act like it is all the time. Hence the, this, you know, previous slide on this, you know, the results that they came up with. But in any case, you know, this was just a snapshot. It was self-reported. So this study's kind of like just crap, but it gets a lot of attention. So again, I'm just trying to make the point that when we try to find out the best way and healthiest way for us to live our lives, if we look to the research, there's a lot of crap. And it's also never, it's not like they studied me, Jill Cruz, personally. They never did that, right? So I have to take that with a grain of salt. Always take it with a grain of salt. No pun intended. So, and my next point, so that's really important. Throw away dogma and listen to your own body, which I say all the time. The next part that's really, really important is that the first thing that you should do in your diet is be nice to yourself. So really step one is love and forgiveness, compassion, acceptance. So, well, that's more than one step, but you know what I mean? Like all of the blame and the dialogue of the guilt, you know, like, oh man, I eat so much sugar, or I just can't seem to, you know, eat enough vegetables, or whatever it is that we think we have to live this perfect life. And it's just, it doesn't exist. It really does not exist. As a matter of fact, this morning I woke up and I scribbled this down. I wanted to post it on Instagram one of these years. I said, forget what the Instagram stars tell you. The road to lasting weight loss is paved with imperfection, forgiveness, and growth. And this is what I'm learning when I work with my clients. None of my clients, even though they're losing weight, none of them just lose weight perfectly in this wonderful, perfect world where it's going directly down. It doesn't work like that. There's always mistakes. There are always problems and challenges, and you do things that you are bad for you or whatever. So I think it's really important to first accept that the mistakes are actually built into the process and they're gifts. And I think this is actually true for life, right? Like, this is how we grow and learn. If we don't make mistakes, we don't grow. And I'm not just saying that like in like a cliche kind of way, like I really, really mean it. So I think that's really important in any dietary strategy. And then the next step is to eat for your body, as opposed to listening to dietary dogma. Figure out the protein, fat, and fiber that your body needs. And those are macronutrients: protein, fats, carbohydrates. These are what we call macronutrients. If you can figure out the macronutrients, usually the micronutrients will fall into place. So that's more like, well, do I get enough B12? Do I get enough calcium? Do I get enough magnesium? You know, all the vitamins and minerals and that sort of thing. The course of action is to start paying attention to your macronutrients first. And because those macronutrients are going to satisfy your energy needs and like your hunger and that sort of thing. So they need to be considered first. And then like if somebody's they feel really good, they're not having cravings, they're not hungry or anything. And then, you know, then we can start asking questions about, are they getting enough B vitamins? And with my clients that I work with, I use an app called Chronometer, where I can actually see all of their macronutrients, but I can also see their vitamins and minerals. So it's pretty cool. Like the first month or so, we're just focusing on the macros, and then we start looking at the vitamins and nutrients. So, and then basically you want to start with what you like. What a novel idea, right? Like, I'm giving you permission to eat what you want, but it should be whole foods mostly. And that's where the piece where the micronutrients fall into place as well. So if you think that you need to eat a high protein diet and you're eating hot dogs, or you're eating steak, which is a much less processed food, your macros may be the same. You may be getting the same amount of protein or fat, but the minerals in particular are going to be different. So that's also, and even between like a grass-fed beef and a conventional beef. A conventional beef is going to have less of a good like profile of nutrients. So if you're kind of wondering, you know, what should I eat? You start with what you like, but you focus on whole foods. And I'll talk more about that. And then you pay attention to your body as you experiment. So these are the 6 factors to consider to see if a diet is working for you. I have this as a blog post, so if you want to like go and read more about it, you can. But if you are currently eating a particular way and you think it's pretty good, you can then look at these 6 factors and see if it's good for you, for your body. Or if you're thinking, well, I'm going to try the keto diet, or I'm going to try a paleo, or I'm going to try something new, then as you're going on your journey, you can also consider these 6 factors. So if you look at yourself right now, you could say, well, how's my energy? And, you know, and I'm just going to run through what would be like the ideal situation. Energy would be calm and consistent throughout the day. So you wake up, you feel rested. You kind of feel like you have good energy all day long. Now, there is some evidence that around 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, humans naturally will feel a little dip in energy because we have such a long history of napping. We're like kind of a napping, like that's what we do naturally. So I think they call it biurnal or diurnal. I forget what the term is, but we sleep twice. We really do sleep twice. Anyway, so it's normal to have a little bit of a dip in energy, but it shouldn't be like, you know, you on the desk, like you can't function, or you need a cup of coffee. And the problem with judging your diet based on energy is that most people prop up their energy with caffeine. So that's something to keep in mind. But, you know, the way that you're eating is going to directly affect your energy, probably more in a more glaring way than anything else. Mood, your mood should be even keeled. We are easygoing, friendly, and patient creatures at our best. We really are. And I'm getting this from like when explorers have gone and examined what they call primitive cultures. I think we're more primitive in many ways, but whatever. When they, you know, untouched by modern civilization, what they see is that the people are totally like chill and they smile a lot and they're happy and there's no depression, no crime. Even Weston Price, who was a guy who went and studied around the world in the 30s, there would be like civilizations of literally hundreds of thousands of people and there's no crime. Go figure. That's what, you know, eating like a Whole Foods diet does to you. Anyway, mental clarity, you want to be clear, focused, and, you know, just like mood and mental clarity, but similar in that you don't want all these crazy fluctuations, right? So it should just be even keeled, and focused, sharp, able to concentrate, able to remember what you were saying. Sometimes people forget what they're saying. Hunger should be, if you have eaten already in that day, you know, like let's say you ate breakfast, you should be able to go 4 to 5 hours without being hungry again. If you eat a meal and then you're hungry 2 hours later, that's a problem. That is an indication that your diet is not providing you with the sustenance that you need. At least 4 to 5 hours. And there's nothing wrong with hunger, but, you know, it can be problematic if you're hungry 2 hours after a meal and you have to eat all day. We are exquisitely designed to go, you know, in the minimum a couple of weeks without eating. So I think we can go 2 hours, right? And you know, that's an extreme because you'd be fasting and everything, but really we should be able to, you know, not be starving in 2 hours. It's really problematic. And part of the problem is that our society has food all day long, right? Like I went to this conference in Montreal and it was breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, and then dinner. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm not hungry. How do people eat this much? But people are used to it. And what people will generally do is they'll eat a small breakfast and then they'll have a snack and then they'll eat a small lunch and then they'll have a snack. That's not very conducive to overall health. So, you know, if you're feeling hungry, you want to look at your meal and say, did I have enough protein? Did I have enough fat? Did I have enough fiber? Physical cravings are very similar. Really, if you're eating a diet that's satisfying your macro and micro needs, you will not have craving, physical cravings. Mental cravings, totally another story. And then gastrointestinal health. So what I was talking about before, for example, when someone starts eating a vegan diet and then all of a sudden they have all this gas and bloating because, you know, it's just too much too soon. So all of these are factors that you can think about either now or if you're planning on starting a new way of eating. Eat whole foods. I have to put this in here. I've been doing research for my book. Man, processed foods are killing us. Like if we could just take away all the dietary dogma and all about who cares if you're eating fat or fiber, I don't care about any of that. Just eat whole foods. Everything would change. Because as you can see, with more processed foods comes a higher incidence of pretty much every modern day chronic disease that we're all afraid of getting. All of them. So And each one of these, like I didn't put it all in here, but each one of these, like for obesity, I have like 10 studies backing that up. This is not, for each of these, multiple studies around the world. This is like, there's no question about this. And then processed foods have more sugar, sodium, and fat, and less vitamins, minerals, fiber, and protein. Probably a lot of other things too that we don't even know about. So like the polyphenols, you know, those plant nutrients that we're maybe not measuring. So the best thing you can do when you're trying to figure out a new way of eating, or you want to improve your diet, is to eat whole foods as much as you possibly can. Ideally, most of your food would not even have a label. It would just be broccoli on the produce, you know, thing there. Or, you know, you're buying, if you buy chicken or steak, it's wrapped in something, but there's really just one ingredient. That after that, you want to look for the least amount of ingredients you possibly can, and look for ingredients you recognize. So now you're getting into processed foods, but they're maybe minimally processed or lightly processed foods. And there is a continuum, and I have a document which I can send to anybody who wants it. Just let me know. Where I kind of, it's a spreadsheet where I put, you know, these are the super duper whole foods, like a cherry tomato you picked out of your garden, or, you know, you milked your goat in the backyard, whoever has goats. And there's your fresh goat milk, or people have chickens and they get the eggs right from the chicken. That's like a mega uber whole foods, right? But there's a continuum all the way on the other end, or like the hot dogs and the macaroni and cheese and the white bread and the yogurts. I always like to bring that up. Yogurt and milk, as you buy it in the grocery store today in New York State, is an extremely highly processed food. So you can't forget about that. Okay, so I just wanted to like run through some dietary approaches that are out there in the world. So in my opinion, before anybody starts doing anything crazy with their diet, they should just eat as many whole foods as they possibly can. That is step one. In an ideal situation. Doesn't always work out that way. But, you know, if I could make the ideal, I would say do that. Then, of course, we know there's carbohydrate restriction, like the Atkins diet, the keto diet. Those are the same thing pretty much. Paleo diet, low carb. I don't know. There's a bunch of names for it. The calorie restriction would be like the Weight Watchers, you know, any kind of popular, like Jenny Craig, that sort of thing. The Slim Fast, which was mentioned earlier, but the Slim Fast is highly processed. Or just watching your calories. And those are definitely, like, calorie restriction is really used for weight loss, or for some people. So there is some evidence that people who eat less calories live longer. So there are people who just restrict their calories from a health perspective. And that's totally has some validity. I don't necessarily agree with it, but people do that. Carb restriction is usually for weight loss, but people do it for all kinds of reasons, for cancer prevention, or if they have cancer, or autoimmune, or metabolic syndrome, diabetes, that sort of thing. Elimination diets. So there's, of course, as we all know, there are people who eat a gluten-free diet, or they eat a dairy-free diet, or they eat gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, beans, nuts free diet, and they have all these things that they can't eat. Usually people are doing that for GI issues, for skin issues, for autoimmune issues. Again, very extreme. And in my experience, most of the people who are eating those elimination diets do tend to be eating whole foods. So I will give them that. However, those are people with like autoimmune and stuff. But as we know, like the gluten-free diet is very popular. Dairy-free is very popular. Vegan diet, very popular. And you go to the store and you find all these frankenfoods that have been designed. It's like, I don't eat meat, but I'll eat a soy burger. Or, they have all these fake meat foods, which are made out of crap. It's highly, highly processed. Like, why don't you just eat the steak? That at least you're eating a whole food, So there's a lot of problematic stuff going on in that world, especially with gluten and dairy, I would say. Gluten-free bread is got some of the, it's like cornstarch, potato starch, rice starch. None of that sounds really very nutritious, and it's not. There's no fiber, there's no nutrition in it at all. And then there's all the milks, the milk and cheese substitutes, which are made from, you know, almonds and stuff. Again, highly processed. Now, some people really need to do that. And I think that they need to do what they should, you know, to get by, of course, do it. But we all need to be aware of what those foods are. And they're mostly just highly processed. And then there's all these specialized diets like low histamine, low oxalate, blah, blah, blah. But those only really should be done if someone has told you to do it and someone is guiding you through that. And then there's time restricted feeding and fasting. So like skipping breakfast would be time restricted feeding, skipping breakfast and lunch, let's say. Fasting would be, you know, a 24-hour fast once or twice a week, or a 48-hour fast, or a 5-day fast once a quarter or once a year or whatever. So these are all different approaches to eating that are out there. And so if you want to talk about any of them or have questions about any of them, and, you know, there's not necessarily anything wrong with picking a diet with saying, I'm going to do the paleo diet. The problem comes when we follow it dogmatically and we don't pay attention to our bodies. So, and I also want to mention that I am doing this workshop. This is a free workshop that I'm doing next week on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, between Christmas and New Year's, which is kind of this sweet spot time when things are kind of at a lull, right? Like business is usually quiet. A lot of people are off. You know, it's kind of like a quiet time of the year in a sense, like all the frenzy of Christmas is over. And we're just eating leftovers and hanging around the house, which is fun. So I'm going to do this workshop, which will be all about self-care, which I mentioned earlier, I think is the foundation for any endeavor to improve your health needs to start with self-care. So we're going to talk about forgiveness and appreciation, and also talking about, you know, values, like what's important to you, and maybe going into the year, like what would be some goal setting stuff, but really from like a self-care and self-love perspective, as opposed to, oh man, I ate all this food over the holidays and now all I want to do is a detox and just get rid of it. And oh, I feel so gross and disgusting. And meanwhile, we're judging ourselves nonstop. All of us. I don't care if you're thin, you're heavy, whatever. We all, I mean, not every single person, but anybody who indulges over the holidays is pretty much going to have this conversation. Like, shit, I screwed up and I feel like crap and I have no energy, blah, 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 blah. And that's all just it really comes from like, not self-hate, but the opposite of whatever self-love is. So anyway, I'm doing that workshop and I invite you to join me in that. And I'm going to send out an email to the list. So, you know, you can sign up that way, or you can let me know if you want to do it. And that's it for that. It's more like an overview. And so if you have questions about, you know, for those of you who are here live today, maybe you can ask questions for other people too, because this is recorded and I will post it to the email list.
I actually have a question about, like, what would you recommend kind of just like for the general population of time restricted feeding? Like, do you think everyone should do it like 1 or 2 days a week? Like, what's your thinking on that?
I don't think that everyone should do anything, if that makes sense. Like, I don't ever have the only general recommendations that I have about diet are, number one, eat whole foods as much as you possibly can. Number two, pay attention to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, pay attention to your body. In terms of like specific things like that, it really depends on the person. There are, first of all, there's certain segments of the population that should not be skipping meals. If you're pregnant, you know, even if you're like breastfeeding and have small children should not. Like up until the age is 25, but I do bend the rules a little bit for some. I've worked with people, like if I'm following them. And then technically people over 65 or 70 really shouldn't skip meals. Although again, there are exceptions. In general, we eat too much food. So most people would benefit from some just eating less, which can be, you know, but if someone is saying, like, I personally, I don't need to lose weight per se, but I definitely want to maintain my body composition. So I do skip breakfast as often as I can. So it really just depends on the person. In general, fasting is health promoting as far as we can tell from, like, again, population studies. And there's been a lot of research in, like, animals and yeast, you know, other living organisms over time. Like, they started with, like, the yeast and they moved up and up, and then they started on humans. But we know that people who eat less live longer, at least from population studies. So yeah, generally speaking, it's probably a good thing in our society for most people to at least consider it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Mary, did you have, like, a specific question or purpose for coming on the call today?
No, I really just wanted to learn a little bit more, and it's really helpful. You told me about the whole foods before, but hearing that again is always good.
Yeah.
I mean, my big thing, since I'm a vegetarian, because I, from more of an animal protection standpoint,
Yeah.
I'm getting, not because I don't eat meat, or I didn't like chicken, or I don't eat the protein or anything like that. So I find finding substitutes, that's always tripping me up. But I eat fish, as you know, so I've been eating a lot more fish. But I don't know. I'm sort of beginning to think about eating more. Perhaps, I mean, if there's any such thing as, like, humanely treated livestock, kind of. But I don't know. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah.
It's very
So
factory farming.
yeah. So again, I guess I do have a general, another generalization that I could say is that I prefer to encourage people to eat as broad a variety of food as we possibly can. Humans throughout history have eaten mostly pretty restrictive diets, because it's like, you lived in New York in December, you weren't eating an orange unless you were, you know, like during the colonial days, like, you know, you were really rich and they were sent up. But, you know, definitely native people who lived here, they may have had access to, like, some dried fruit, but there was no oranges or, you know, all these foods that we eat. So I think inherently humans do not need a lot of variety, but in our current day where we have all this toxicity in the environment, and whether it's in the foods itself or just in the air and the water and everything. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about eating the same foods over and over again, even if it's chicken or whatever it is, or eating beans all the time, every day, whatever would be, like, the microtoxins that are in all the foods, you're not diverse. Let's put it this way: diversify the toxicity. That sounds terrible, but you know, it's in a way better to get a lot of variety of food, so that you're not being overexposed to too much of one bad thing. So an example of that is chicken is very high in arsenic, just in general, like general studies, you know, like out there in conventional food. So and people, the American public has been taught that red meat is bad and chicken is good, right? That's what we've been taught. Total bullshit, in my opinion, because it depends on the quality of the meat. So so many people come to me and they're like, yeah, they eat chicken like 5 or 6 days a week. And I'm like, first of all, that's gross. But I'm not a huge chicken fan. But that's just my personal opinion, nothing to do with the food itself. But the people who, you know, they're eating that, they're getting exposed to a lot of arsenic, maybe. Whereas if they diversify, same thing with fish. I mean, if you're eating fish 10 times a week, you're probably increasing your chances of getting exposed to, like, certain types of PCBs and mercury and stuff like that. So variety is good. And it's good for that reason. It's also good for all the little nutrients that you're getting, different types of nutrients, right? Especially in the vegetable or plant world. There's so many different there's, I thought it was 8,000 polyphenols, but I think someone said at this conference I was at that there were 22,000. I don't know. There are a lot of polyphenols out there in the world, and in the in the plant world. So the more variety we get in different plant foods, the more different nutrients we're getting. So that's the first part. That's why I tend to I don't ever encourage someone to eat a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet or a paleo diet where they're eating or a carnivore diet, where they're eating I don't think it's good. But then people do it for reasons, right? There are definitely, there is no humane way to kill an animal. That's just fact, right? Like, it's dying. And that's maybe the clincher for you, that you're like, look, would that animal be alive or not because of me? It's hard, right? But in terms of how they're raised, yes, there's lots and lots of options for that. I actually, when I go out, I almost, like if I go to a restaurant where they don't have grass-fed steak or something like that, I will tend to eat vegetarian, because I feel very, very strongly against factory farm.
Right.
I think it should be illegal. I don't even understand why we allow it.
I know.
It's
50 years from now, we'll look back and it'll just be like, hopefully, that people think it's barbaric.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it really is barbaric, and it's on so many levels.
Yeah.
It's also just nutritionally inferior.
Right. Right, sure.
And the other thing is, there are you can buy organic milk and butter and meat that is factory farmed. Right. A lot of people don't know that.
It's very tricky to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I eat dairy, and dairy cows are some of the most mistreated animals out there. So it's hard to.
Yes. Yeah, because they are impregnated and milked, and then impregnated and milked. And actually, dairy that we buy in the store, like I mentioned earlier, is it's so processed. If it was conventional, let's say, it would be the worst scenario, where they're pumping them up with antibiotics and hormones and stuff. So already that milk is when it comes out. And then they live under very unsanitary conditions, because they're just giving them antibiotics. So they don't need a healthy cow. And do you think that a highly sick cow is going to produce a good quality milk for us? No, of course not. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So then they just dump, they don't dump, but they basically homogenize it, because everybody wants low fat, right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. They homogenize it, which means they spread. I don't know the process if it's low fat milk. Actually, they probably remove the fat and then homogenize it. I don't know the order, but in any case, there are three things that happen. It's homogenized, it's pasteurized, and then the fat is removed. Right. Those are all intense practices. And at this point, the milk that you buy is all ultra pasteurized, which means it's been boiled. I think it's 250 degrees for 3 or 4 minutes or something. So it's really just a different food. Right. And yes, the even Horizon, I know there was a big scandal a couple of years ago because they're organic milk, but they were basically just completely factory farming these animals. Right. Horrible. Have you ever driven past a factory farm?
I have just in the Delmarva Peninsula, to the chicken farms. I haven't driven by a meat farm, but the chicken farms are pretty bad anyway.
Yeah. I mean, they stink. You could smell them miles before you see them. It's disgusting. And also, those poor farmers are like indentured servants too, which is a whole nother thing.
I know. There's really just nothing good about it.
Right. Except that it's cheap.
Yeah, well, somebody's making a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's mass produced. And that's another issue, is that most people eat too much food.
Right. And then there's a lot of waste, I think, too.
Yeah, it's we don't need 300 pounds of chicken. You just need a little bit. And that's the other thing. If you were to start eating meat, it doesn't mean that you have to chow down on a steak, you can have, I was talking about this with somebody yesterday, I can't remember who, and I was saying that, it was at the gym. I was saying that in our family, when I buy steak, I buy 1 pound. about a 1 pound steak. Of course, it's expensive steak, right? It's like ribeye, you know, 20 or sometimes even $30 a pound. So all we're getting is 1 pound, people.
Right.
And then we just, like, I myself will literally eat like this much steak. Like, it's probably 2 ounces or 3 ounces max.
Right.
And it's perfect. So, you know, we don't need to eat a lot of it, but the Nyack Farmers Market would be a good place to start. They have a beef and pork farmer there that's totally grass-fed.
Oh.
She, if you talk to her, her name is Thelma. I love that name, Thelma. Sounds like a farmer, right? She will show you pictures. So she keeps some of her cows, like especially if it's a female, she'll keep it, and they're like her pets. She has like, I think 10 or more cows that are just her pets. She loves cows. You know what I mean? So the way that she raises them is very, very humane. But the processing, you know, I mean, you still got to kill the cow.
Right.
And there's no way around that. So if you can't get past that, then,
right.
you know, and maybe that's the deal breaker right there. Because I mean,
right. No, it's, well, I don't know. I really have to rethink that, just because also my daughter is a vegetarian, and I think it's not great for her. So I kind of have to rethink the whole thing. Life isn't perfect. It's funny, when I was in Ireland, just for a week, it was so easy to be a vegetarian there. Everywhere I ate out, it was great. But here, I feel like it's a little bit harder. I mean, just like the stores even.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you go. I'm a little bit surprised about the Ireland thing, though, because I picture them being like major meat eaters over there,
right,
you know?
Right. Well, I guess I was in Dublin, in that kind of like, that part of it that's sort of like San Francisco. Like, there's all this high tech, and every other restaurant seemed to be vegetarian, and they just had this array of choices. It's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, like, I know for people who go to Israel, if you've ever been to Israel, like the food there is just incredible.
Is it? Yeah.
I haven't been there personally, but from everything that I've heard, when people rave about it, you go and you're at the hotel and there's a buffet and there's like 20 different salads. Like you probably could just forget that meat existed, you know, and just
it all. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's true. I think here it is harder for sure. But from just like any diet where you restrict an entire food group, you have to, and I've probably said this to you before, Mary, like you have to make up for it. You can't just be like, oh, I don't eat meat. And like, well, you need zinc, you need iron, you need B12, you know, there's B2 is another one. Like we need to supplement if we're going to restrict entire food groups. So that's, you know, especially like for your daughter, just make sure she's taking, I would be giving her extra minerals, you know, B12 and minerals, especially zinc is really important for sexual maturity and development.
Oh, right. Okay. She does take a multivitamin, but yeah.
But if you could get her to eat seafood, that helps too, because, you know, like zinc, oysters and clams, you know, they have very high in zinc.
Oh, great. Okay.
So for someone who's a vegetarian, but they eat seafood and fish, I'm sort of like, well, you're probably okay.
Right. That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like you probably don't need to go and like eat meat, but maybe you do. I don't know. Again, where it comes down to the individual and really, you know, going by how you feel, like those factors that I listed. And then also there's lab work. You know, you can look and see, is this person, like, especially for your daughter, you know, I would be checking her iron, like at least once a year to make sure she's not getting anemic, and not the hemoglobin, but get an actual iron panel and the ferritin as well. Right. Because the hemoglobin is like the last one to know. Right. You know, like you could be deficient for a year before it actually shows up as anemia.
And do you you just go to your doctor and ask for that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, like in a regular visit, you could just say, you know, I'd like to check on my daughter's iron or my own iron. If, you know, for women who are menstruating, it's more of an issue. Right. Okay. You could ask for them to check zinc too. B12, I would look at. for vegetarian. I don't know. I don't know if I'm missing anything. I probably am. all of the minerals are affected by that because meat is rich in minerals.
Oh.
But like magnesium is more, and like potassium are more, you know, vegetable and fruit based stuff.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else around that whole topic.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful.
By the way, I have been to Israel and it is amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's because it's kosher, so you can't have dairy and meat in the same sitting. So usually in the morning they have no meat options because people usually have their dairy in the morning and then they usually have their dairy at night. So like that's why it's usually vegetarian, because of religious reasons.
Yeah,
but it's
that makes
really
it
great.
easier.
If you're a vegetarian, you're just like, my friends are vegetarians and at every meal they said that they had dairy, so they'd be like, oh yeah, no meat, like it's great.
Yeah.
So,
And I think like it's also like the food that they eat, like the, you know, the parsley and the garlic and the oil, the olive oil and the dates, and like there's a lot of that Mediterranean stuff that's just so good.
Yeah, the good hummus.
Yeah. Oh my God, baba ganoush is like my favorite thing in the entire world. I have a lot of Israeli friends around here for like, I guess because I'm friends with one and then I met everybody else. So like I'll have people over and there'll be like 8 Israelis in my house out of 12 people, you know. But my one friend, he's such an amazing cook. He just on the side, I mean, that's not what he does for a living. And they invite us over for Friday night dinner and oh my God, it's so good. It's just so delicious. I personally would lean toward vegetarianism taste-wise, preference-wise, but my body needs, I've tried, like for me, and I may have talked about this somewhere before, I don't know if you've heard this, but for me personally, if I don't eat like a good amount of protein at night, I will start having cravings. Because my weak spot is in the evening, like after dinner, because like when my first child was born, I developed this bad habit of eating at night, like late at night. And it was almost like, okay, the day's over, the child's asleep, now I can reward myself. And I like created this mental association, which I to this day struggle. I mean, I'm over it, but I still have to pay attention. But and if I don't eat pretty much meat or fish at dinner, by 8 p.m. I'm like, the wheels are going. And it's weird. I'm like, I don't know what I want, but I just need something. So the subtlety of really figuring out like the best way to eat for yourself, I think that it's extremely subtle, refined work. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I get so annoyed with all this dogma, because it's just like, oh, well, just do this. And, you know, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of the lectin diet, like the, what's it called? The book, the Plant Paradox. This guy, Gundry, he's got another book out already. And he's so dogmatic. He's just like, no, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. Vegetables, and a lot of vegetables and plant foods, they have these lectins and they're going to hurt you and they cause autoimmune. It's like, whoa, slow down here, dude. That's just not the case for everybody. Stop saying, like, it just boils my blood. But because it is so subtle and it changes. That's the thing. It totally changes. So we have to be on our toes. And I caution everybody to shy away from being obsessed with it. You know, like, don't be so obsessed that you're like, you know, oh my, I had a little twinge in the side of my belly now. Oh my God, I can't eat whatever it was that you just ate. I can't eat that anymore. You know, like, you don't want to get so extreme with it. But if you're really paying attention, and I think it takes years of paying attention and refining and tweaking and paying attention, and then maybe you change, and you know, it takes a long time to get to that place where you're really confident and you're like, yeah, this I think really works for me. So it's not an easy thing, but I think if you get the basics, which is to pay attention to your body, to eat mostly whole foods, you know, not buy into that dogma, and just have an open mind about it. You know, I mean, it's actually quite wonderful to just be open to things, isn't it? Instead of being so bogged down with all those rules and those regulations. Who wants to live like that? I don't. And I think what part of the problem is that a lot of times people, the way that they eat, especially health conscious people, the way that they eat becomes part of their identity so much that it's like they would lose who they are, you know, if they suddenly started doing something differently. That's sad. So, but I mean, I do like recommend, I'm sure Mary, you've heard me say that I recommend that you do create an identity for yourself. Like my identity is like, I am a healthy person. I'm a healthy eater. I have my smoothie. It looks terrible, but it tastes good. I have that every day. That's sort of part of my identity and who I am. But I'm not so dogmatic about it that if I started feeling like the smoothie was not good for me, that I wouldn't stop. Mm-hmm. So anyway, any other questions or things that you guys want to discuss? Oh, it's 12:57. Wow. No? You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
It was great.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yep.